It's another episode of React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Vim. You can find it in my cold dead hands. Episode 192, A Day in the Life of a React Native Developer.
Hey everyone, welcome to the React Native Radio Podcast, where we explore React Native together. I'm your host, founder and CTO of Infinite Red, Jamon Holmgren, coming to you live. Well, not really live, but recorded a couple weeks ago, probably, if you're listening to this, from snowy Vancouver in southwest Washington State. I'm on the React Native core team and also a primary maintainer of MobX State Tree. And I'm joined today by my phenomenal co-host, Robin Heinz. Aditi and Harris couldn't make it today. Robin is a senior software engineer located in Portland, Oregon. She works at Infinite Red. She specializes in React Native and podcasting, of course. What's up, Robin? Do you have any snow left over there in I guess it's west of Portland where you live?
Yeah, we live sort of southwest of Portland. We only have the piles of snow next to our driveway left from shoveling, but otherwise it's all gone. It's a balmy 40, 45 degrees out.
Yeah.
Probably the warmest in the country right now.
Probably. Yeah, it turned pretty mild. We still have snow on the ground, but I got to tell you a tractor story, of course.
Of course.
Of course, it wouldn't be a React Native Radio without it. So we got our first load of snow. When was it? Was it Thursday? Was it a week ago? Something
Thursday,
like that?
Friday.
Yeah.
Week. Yeah.
And immediately I had to grab my tractor and go out there and clear the driveway because, that's part of the reason I got it was to have it for stuff like that. So I was having lots of fun. I was pushing snow around. And I got the driveway cleared and pushed stuff off to the side and whatnot. It did a pretty good job. And then I put the tractor away. Got up the next morning and it was completely socked in with snow again. So it was like I didn't do anything at all.
You just have to look at it like a gift. They gave you the gift of getting to do it again and spending more time with your tractor.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah, I went out there and I pushed snow around again and I got it all cleared again. And then I managed to actually get my tractor stuck. So my tractor is 4-wheel drive, but it has turf tires, which are basically lawnmower tires. It doesn't have the big, knobby tires that a lot of tractors have. So I was messing around in the woods with it and I got it a little bit buried in dirt. But, I'll tell you what, my dad, who owned an excavation company, he always said a tractor or a backhoe, you can't really get them stuck because they have too many ways to get out. And it's true because all I had to do was stick the bucket down and push myself back a couple inches and keep doing that until I got myself out of the swamp.
I've seen some crazy videos of the stuff that loaders and excavators and stuff can do by using their bucket as leverage.
Yeah. It's like they
wild.
have appendages, and backhoes especially, they have basically things out every side because they have the loader out the front, they have the backhoe out the back, and then they have these stabilizers on the side, and then they're 4-wheel drive. They pretty much have everything.
Invincible.
Just ask my dad. He's never gotten stuck in one.
So
apparently.
he says.
This episode is sponsored by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native design and development agency located fully remote in the USA and Canada. We have years of React Native experience. We host Chain React when it does happen. And we publish the React Native newsletter. We also obviously host this podcast and do lots of other cool things like open source with Ignite, Reactatron, you name it. We are the best choice for your next React Native app. Hit us up, hello@infinite.red, or just email me directly, jamon@infinite.red. You can learn more on our website, infinite.red/React Native. Don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. And also, we are hiring. So go to our fancy new form, careers.infinite.red. We are hiring senior level React Native engineers who are located in the USA or Canada at this time. Now, that's very topical actually for the topic that we have. We're going to be describing what a day in the life of a React Native engineer is. And so this is going to be, I think, kind of fun to go through. If you're someone who is new to React Native and just exploring it, I'll probably send this episode to people, the link to people and say, hey, listen to this if they're interested in knowing what it's like. Also, if you are considering switching from maybe another type of business, toward consulting, we're going to be talking about it from a consulting standpoint, obviously, since that's what both of us do. If you're looking at switching technologies, what kind of, challenges do you run into doing React Native? So we're going to talk about a day in the life of a React Native developer.
Specifically one who works at Infinite Red, but I imagine it'll apply pretty generally.
Yeah, that's the hope. Obviously, we are, we're speaking from our own perspective. We can't really say what it's like to work at Facebook as a React Native engineer, but we can talk about our perspective for sure. With that in mind, obviously, we're a React Native consultancy, so we don't make our own React Native apps. We help other companies build theirs. So everybody has their own process. If you're working at a company, they're probably going to be using something like Jira or Trello or Asana or, I don't know, what are some other ones, Robin?
Basecamp.
Yeah, I don't know. We've used quite a few in the past. But let's talk about like how we approach a new feature and what the day might look like. And I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, Robin, if that's okay, because, my day looks a little different as CTO at Infinite Red.
Yes, it definitely does. Yeah, that sounds good.
Let's start off with just some basics. Like what computer do you use?
I have a pretty much fully loaded MacBook Pro 2019 16-inch.
Yeah, that's what I have as well. It's a great computer. It's not an M1. It would have been nice to know that was coming, but
it's not an M1. It has its little quirks. It's a huge step up from my 2016 MacBook Pro, which is what I upgraded from, and the keyboard is much better.
Yeah, totally. Do you have other devices around you? What else do you have?
I do have a lot of devices. I wouldn't say that I test with them on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
I usually rely pretty heavily on the simulator and the emulator, but I do have I have my personal, like my regular iPhone is what I use for iOS testing a lot, and I also have a slightly older iPhone, an iPhone 6 to test like older, slower phones. I have a Pixel 2 for testing Android. I have some Samsung devices. I have a couple tablets.
Yep.
Mostly for breaking out when there's specific bugs or when I'm sort of doing overall testing passes to make sure everything looks good on real devices. But yeah, day to day, I mostly spend my time in the simulator and emulator. This
is sort of a challenge of being a remote company. And I know people are running into this now, but we can't just have like a big bank of devices, kind of a common communal pool of devices that you can just grab and say, hey, I need a Moto G or something. And
that's true. That is true. At a previous company where it was an office. We had basically a server rack, like full-size server rack full of just like every flavor of device, and you could go check them out and do your testing and put them back. And it was a really slick system. So doing this remotely has been a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
A lot of duplication. Everyone kind of has to have their own set.
Yeah, which is a positive and a negative at the same time. Positive because obviously it's all your stuff and you can kind of keep it how you want it. Negative because, well, everybody has to have, duplication all over.
I do take advantage of finding refurbished devices on Amazon. Most of my devices are refurbished or open box. That
honestly is better anyway, because most people aren't using things on brand new devices. It's better to have stuff that's a few years old. I have a bunch of devices as well. And when I broke them out and I was putting them, in my office, my 9-year-old came up to me, and her 12-year-old sister had just gotten a phone, because sometimes she'll babysit or whatever. And she like picks up one of the iPhones. She's like, Dad, here's an iPhone. I'm like, yeah. She's like, could I have it? I'm like, you're 9. You don't need a phone. You don't need to start that addiction right now. It's bad enough.
Plenty of time in your life.
Plenty of time. Yeah. Go be a kid for a while and enjoy it. But yeah, don't get into that. Dad has plenty of phones laying around, but that's not what they're for.
Yep.
So beyond hardware, What just basic tools do you use? Are you a Vim person? Do you use VS Code? What do you use?
I use VS Code. I was a Vim person in a former life. And at one point, I just decided that the value wasn't worth the downsides.
Vim.
I quit Vim.
I didn't even think that was possible.
Yes, I quit Vim. Partly because I got into the React Native world and the JavaScript world, and it was much more common for people to use IDEs, and specifically VS Code was really common. And I found that if I was using Vim, it was really difficult if I needed to pair with someone or show someone something. Yeah. They would have trouble figuring out what was going on and how to do things on my machine.
That's true.
I wanted more in common with sort of the community and my colleagues. And I finally admitted that I really liked having a traditional user interface.
Do you use Vim binding, key bindings?
No, not at all. I think I did for maybe a week.
Yeah.
No, it's just easier just to use the VS Code shortcuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm more of a traditional, I used I started with Dreamweaver, but then I went to Sublime Text 2, and then I went to, for a little while I used Atom. And for a while I actually had two computers, and one computer had Atom and the other one had VS Code, I think. And so I was switching between the two. But Atom was just so slow. It was so, I don't know what it was about it. It was just so slow, hard to keep up with. So VS Code, something about the way that it's built, it just seems to perform so much better.
Yeah, it does. It really does. It kind of rules the space now.
So I know you use other software and stuff, but we probably won't dig into that right now. I want to talk more about what a typical day looks like. You're working on a project. You're probably working with one or two other people, most likely. Yep.
Yeah.
You might be in the middle of a project. You're in the middle of a project and there's a new feature that you need to now take on. You've already you just shipped something and now you're moving on to the next thing. What happens first?
Well, I'd say first, if I'm sort of warming up into the day, roll in, you check Slack. Somebody posted a PR at the end of the day yesterday.
A pull request.
Yep. A pull request. Yeah. So I'll go look at that, give some feedback. Maybe some examples of stuff I might say. Maybe a colleague is using a utility function in a couple different places, and I suggest moving it into a shared hook.
Right. I
noticed they were using a timestamp in some mock data that was in seconds instead of milliseconds.
That'll ruin your day.
That kind of stuff, I think.
Are these real examples?
These are real examples, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll notice things like pulling data from a navigation param and not persisting it in some other more permanent way. Mm-hmm. I'll maybe suggest storing it in MobX state tree so that it'll persist between refreshes.
Yep.
That kind of thing. Typos.
So you're scanning down. Do you just start at the top and just review straight from the top all the way down, like a diff? I guess for people maybe that are new to programming, pull request, you'll actually see a diff, which is we modified this line, we deleted this line, we added this line, we added this file, and you can kind of see it all the way down GitHub. And so do you kind of just start at the top and work your way down? Do you have a certain process around that?
Yeah, I'll usually go by the file hierarchy, and I'll just go file by file. Mm-hmm. I'll usually skip over files that just seem like they have a lot of white space changes or packaged yarn.lock or snapshot differences. Yeah, I'll usually go file by file and just see what jumps out at me.
Yep.
Sometimes if it's a particularly complex feature, I'll actually pull the branch down and run it and check the features. If it's a more simple feature, I'll usually rely on the screenshots and the videos or GIFs that were included with the PR. I always recommend including if it's a visual feature or some kind of functionality that you can see, including screenshots or GIFs or a video if it's really long.
Yeah, totally. Having those types of things on a pull request are really helpful to people that are reviewing. Another thing I like to do, which I don't know if everybody likes doing this, but I like to actually go down and comment on my own PR and say, hey, this is why I did this. This is why I did that. Just give some context around the changes. Sometimes that's better in code comments actually in the code, but not always. Sometimes it's I changed this from this. We don't need that to live in there forever. It just needs to, be in the PR.
Yeah, I'll do that as well. Sometimes I'll have to make a decision between putting it in the PR description where it's more sort of historical and permanent versus putting it in the like in line in the code.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if it's in line in the code and there's changes, like those comments can sometimes disappear if the code gets outdated.
Yeah.
So if it's something that I want as like a permanent like record, I'll usually put it in the PR description or in the commit message or like you said, in comments in the code itself. It's
kind of interesting, just a little aside, Git really isn't everything about the history of a code base. GitHub is, or Bitbucket or whatever you're using, that like those two things working together are the full history. Because Git itself holds a history of changes, but it doesn't hold a history of conversations and explanations and you know, whatnot. So that's kind of an interesting piece of this.
Now you have me curious. If you rebase your code and like rewrite Git history, does GitHub or Bitbucket have any kind of like memory or log of what it was before you rebased?
I haven't tested this. I feel like they do. Like they hang on to more stuff than you would think. But I could be wrong about that. I'd have to test that.
That's a different can of worms there. But
so the big thing here, though, is you're reviewing a teammate's code and you're looking through it and you have context around it because you've probably seen this code before and you've maybe even worked on it. And then after you're done kind of providing your feedback, what do you do next?
If it's significant enough feedback that I want them to make changes, I'll like indicate that. If they're not significant enough, they're just like suggestions, then I'll go ahead and approve it and move on.
And they can can choose to.
They can either choose to address it and make changes or merge it and move on with their lives. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. Now, you might have a pull request that's out there as well. Is this also gathering comments and whatnot?
Yeah, usually at the beginning of the day, my ideal workflow, like cadence, is getting finished with a feature at the end of the day and opening a PR and then like closing my computer and being on my merry way. That doesn't happen actually all that often. But
I was gonna say, is that like every single day you do that?
Not every single day, definitely. I love it when it works out that way. But so if I've had a PR open from the previous day, I'll go check it, and there's usually comments, and I'll maybe push up a commit or two, fixing small things. If it's good after that, I'll merge it or have our QA team test it and merge it. Depends on what your particular team workflow is.
I have to say, my particular workflow, like if I was working with you every day committing code, you would notice this. And you probably have noticed this anyway. I have a hard time encapsulating things into small bite-sized chunks. I love big sprawling changes. That's how I love to work.
Jamon lives for, what is it, git commit -a or something. You add everything
exactly
unstaged in your works, but you don't even like look at what you're adding. You just add everything.
It's all good. It's all getting out there. It's shipping. Yeah, I have a command, GAC, get, add, and commit.
Right. That's what
I should do. GACD. It should be get, add, commit, deploy. And then Y for YOLO. I don't know. It's
which is so different from what I do, where I'll go through. I use git add -p.
Yeah.
Every single time, where it steps me through every single change that I made, so I can confirm that yes, I want to add this. Yes, I want to add this.
I definitely don't recommend my way of working for working within a team, and it's something that when I do work within a team, I have to modulate that. I have to really, really work hard to. Honestly, I'm working on an internal project right now. And at first we were working together on stuff. And then it got to be where it was kind of just me because everybody got busy. And I feel myself moving back into those old habits. There's literally a Jamon branch that is just accruing stuff. And I have a PR out called Tons of Updates.
Oh, I need to review that. That reminds me.
Good luck. 14 commits.
Approve, I think.
I did put comments on things, but there have been 5 commits on it since. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what to say, except for I'm sorry. And, things are getting done. I'll tell you that. Things are getting done. It is taking shape. And sometimes, like, sorry to take this whole aside here, but sometimes I feel like on these sort of like this internal project, we just need sort of the basic thing, hacked out with an axe here. And then after it's up, like, maybe we can start using more fine-grained tools to shape it. But it's that's kind of where I'm at right now. So yeah, you're quite different in that, and I definitely would recommend people follow Robin's example here.
Yeah, Jamon's a really, really great manager.
Wow. Yes. I'll take that as a positive. It didn't sound like one. Anyway, so you have some, you might have a PR out there, and then you'll address comments that have come in on your own pull request as well.
Yeah, this is like me doing my paperwork for the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then now it's time to move into the new feature. Like where are you at there?
Right. So this is assuming I'm sort of in between features, and so I'll go to our sprint backlog, which is the features that we've chosen for this particular sprint. And if you're not familiar with Agile, a sprint is a chunk of time, usually 1 or 2 weeks, where you pick up a predefined collection of work that you're committing to complete within the sprint. And usually, depending on the team, you'll assign things to team members at the beginning and sort of so everyone kind of knows what they're going to work on. Some teams don't do that. Some teams, like, you just have a backlog for the team for the sprint, and people pick up with whatever's available when they have time. We generally tend to assign things out ahead of time so that maybe there's areas that particular people are more familiar with or have been working on and have context for. So I'll usually go and pick up the next thing that's assigned to me. For the sake of this day in the life example, this is going to be a new component, a new visual component in the app. It's a component that is basically the backside of a card, and it has a bunch of text in various sections. Like there's a title section and a description and a subtitle and then sort of a table with like value pairs, like label and value pairs.
Yep.
So it's a pretty straightforward visual component. So I'll pick up the card. If it's in Jira, I'll do like the workflow changes. Like I'll say, oh, it's in progress, and so I'm like officially starting work on it. I'll do sort of the get busy work, make a branch, make sure my workspace, my like Git workspace is clean, that I've like pulled in the latest master and everything's up to date. And I'll usually make sure the app is running on my clean branch before I've made any changes, so that I know I'm sort of starting in a good place.
That sounds like, to me, I'm hearing pain that has been caused by not doing that in the past.
Yeah.
Because I've been in situations where I've started working on something, and then I'm like, hey, this old bug is popping up. And I'm like, oh, I didn't pull master.
Yeah. And then if you've already made work, then you have to like stash it. And maybe there's conflicts now when you try and merge. Yeah. So it's
conflicts.
Making sure that you're working with a clean slate and that everything's good to go. And it also helps you sort of have peace of mind that you know kind of where things started. So if issues arise while you're working, you kind of have a sense whether you created them or whether they existed before.
That's really important. Knowing kind of where you're starting. You got to have kind of an anchor point. Like, where are we starting here? Yeah, totally makes sense to me. So you're now you're moving on into the component. You want to create the first component. Do you just create a file and start typing? What do you do?
Most of the time, we're working on projects that are Ignite projects.
Ignite, of course, being our project boilerplate generator that it's an open source project. You can go check it out. We'll put it in the show notes.
Now, Ignite Flame does not have generators anymore. Is that right?
It does have generators, actually. It has really cool ones, but
that's right. They're more configurable and
they're more configurable, but they're also less flexible.
Almost all of our projects are Ignite projects. So when I start a new component, I use Ignite generators. I just run Ignite generate component with the name that I'm choosing for my component. and it gives me a generic component file, story file
In a folder,
in a folder, ready to go. At this point, what I usually do is get the app running in storybook mode and just have it running the generic generated component.
Okay, talk about Storybook for a second.
Storybook, yeah, that's a good point. So Storybook is a library that lets you, it sort of serves multiple purposes. It lets you build components sort of in a vacuum, and then also gives you a way to sort of create a library of all your components. So you're displaying like, oh, here's my button, here's my card, here's my like, all of your various quote unquote dumb components.
Yep.
Lets you sort of display them in a list. And I use it when I'm developing components so that the sort of the other context of my app layout and everything is irrelevant. I'm just what goes into the component and what does it look like sort of in a vacuum.
Right.
But that involves running the app in Storybook mode. So you'll see the Storybook interface, which has sort of a navigator so you can select between your various components. And then it has a main screen, which lets you display your component in various states. So you can do like, oh, here's my component if this value is passed in props, and here it is if this other value is passed in props. Or you can do various different states that your component can exist in.
Right. That's kind of the big value, right? Because like a lot of times when you build a component, it's like, oh, hey, it works really well for this one state. But then what happens when there's no data? Or what happens when you're in a loading state, or if there's an error state? You need to have all those different states. And so Storybook kind of gives you tools to, and actually kind of almost like pushes you to provide those states. Like it's kind of almost nudging you that direction, right?
Right. So I'll usually have a use case for just normal happy path expected values, and then I'll have something like, oh, a really long title, or a missing title, or, you know, the various things that might happen if you're missing data, or if your data is various different shapes, or whatever can happen to it.
I think that the idea of breaking things down into subcomponents is a really key part of being an effective, well, a developer of any sort. To be honest, you could be doing this in, you know, as a desktop app developer or whatever, but being able to break things down into their subcomponents and really think about them in terms of atomic units is really big. But certainly in React Native, that's big because everything's a component. Every view is a component. Everything is, even screens, full screens are components. And so you're composing from different elements and pieces and configuring those things in order to make them work. And obviously you're also styling them. We had a previous episode about styling, so that's part of this as well. Do you do the styling early, or do you kind of do that, you know, toward the end after you rough it in?
I generally do. I lay things out and then I style afterwards. Yeah. And styling is kind of, it's a pretty broad term. So like layout includes things like padding and margins and things like that, which is included in style, but I tend to do it first. But anyway, yeah, Storybook is really great. It helps with a lot of different parts of component development. It helps keep components dumb, for lack of a better word. It helps keep you from making them know too much about the greater context, so that you have to pass in everything that it's going to need to know as a prop. Yeah. So yeah, once I get the app running in Storybook mode with my sort of default generated component, and then usually what I'll do next is define the props for the component, figure out what data it's going to need to be passed in, and get that defined. I'll make the TypeScript type for that in the component itself.
I was going to say TypeScript comes into play here because that is obviously, you know, very helpful for interfaces, and what you're talking about with props is an interface.
And TypeScript is obviously what we use. It's sort of a replacement for other systems like Flow or prop types.
Right.
But yeah, we use TypeScript so that we know exactly what types our props will be. So I'll define that in the component itself. And then in the story, I will create some mock data, and just sort of data that's going to look like what the actual data that'll be passed into this component will look like.
Yep.
And then I'll modify the story so it's passing in all of those things as props, and then I'll re-render. And at this point, I'll start putting in sort of rough layout hierarchy, just sort of views with the data from props just sort of put on the screen without any fanciness, any styling, and just to make sure it all renders and the data is coming through the way I expect.
At what point do you start finding value in adding tests? Obviously, there's like just snapshot tests that we've used in the past, or story shots. I think Storybook has a feature called story shots. So are those helpful at this point, or do they kind of not really add a lot of value there?
So for building components like this, the snapshot tests don't really come into play while you're building it. The value of the snapshots comes in when you're already done and you're trying to make sure down the line when you're building something else that you're not breaking what you've already built. So I don't really, tests don't really come into play when I'm building components like this. I'll bring in sort of TDD, test-driven development strategies more when I'm building models or like API functions or utility files or services or other things that aren't really UI components.
And obviously later you also have integration end-to-end tests with Detox or Appium or along those lines. Those things will come in, but that's more after the integration has happened. Yeah.
Like I said, I'll create sort of a rough hierarchy of views. I'll usually put in empty styles at this point. Like I kind of use styles as labels for things in a way to sort of get my bearings about where I am and what the component looks like in my mental model of it.
Right.
So I'll put empty styles on things like title wrapper or like description wrapper, like views that'll be around the text components that will be the content. And I'll leave them empty for now, but just sort of so that it's not just a bunch of generic views. It's like, okay, I'm defining like, okay, this is going to be the title and this is going to be the description and sort of laying things out. And then once I have content and I'm sure that the content is rendering on the screen, then I'll start adding padding and margins and sort of pushing things around and figuring out what needs flex, what needs like what alignment to give things, what justification to give things. And I sort of just keep tweaking until it looks right.
What like design tools are you using at this point to kind of like, we use a variety of different design tools. If our designers are working on it, you're probably working in Sketch. You probably have InVision as well as another tool. What other, like what design tools do you tend to be in, and how are you using these? Are you like measuring things and finding pixel, numbers and font sizes and stuff like that?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So if our designers have designed it or other designers, a lot of them also use the same tools. But usually there'll be a sketch file or an InVision mockup. And both of those will give me the ability to measure and see what spacing is exactly. I also use a tool called Xscope. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
I actually am not.
It's something that one of our old developers at IR turned me on to, but
okay.
It's basically a set of rulers and other sort of measuring tools for your machine. So you can measure things on your screen compared to other things. So like I'll measure and make sure things are like straight up and down and aligned with each other. And then compare them to I'll put the mocks and the simulator side by side and make sure they're the same scale, and then use rulers to sort of like make sure things are the same alignment and they look right.
I am going to put Xscope in the show notes, and then I'm going to check it out later. That looks really cool.
Yeah. So I'll usually have the designs up and right next to my simulator while I work. Yeah.
By the way, do you have multiple monitors or one?
I have one monitor, but I also have my laptop screen as a second monitor.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a big monitor, and that's usually where I'll have VS Code, and sometimes I'll have the simulator on top of VS Code.
Yeah.
And Reactotron. So I'll either be in like simulator and Reactotron together mode, or I'll be in editor mode. And then on my laptop screen is usually where I have Slack and
Yeah.
Slack
makes
and
sense.
Trello and sort of the other more administrative tools.
Yeah, I kind of do the same. I have two monitors. Well, I have one monitor and my laptop, but I use my laptop display as my primary monitor, even though it's smaller. And I use the other one, but I don't know. Things move around a lot on my screen. It's just how I want to work. A lot of times I use like the Mac OS spaces as individual projects because I'm often working on different projects. And so one space might have terminal and VS Code and a Chrome instance. The next space might have terminal and VS Code and an iOS simulator. So I'm jumping between spaces and then they're all there. And I tend to overlap. I don't go full screen. I overlap a little bit so that I can like click over to the other view and it pops on top pretty easily within my, but I've noticed like one of our developers, Julian, he has like one whole space is like a full screen VS Code. And then he's got a whole nother space for something else. And he's switching spaces all the time in order to do that. I
never have gotten into Mac OS spaces. I don't know why. They just don't like work with my brain.
Yeah.
It's more easy for me to keep track of sort of the layers on my one space. And I utilize Alt Tab a lot.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because of that, I guess I don't really use Alt Tab very often because I'm swiping or I'm clicking on partially, like a lot of times I'll have the terminal on the left side and it's peeking out a little bit so I can see output, but it's not showing the whole terminal. And so when I want to jump over there, I can see like the first line of something. I'll click on it and it pops up. And then I go to the right and click on VS Code and I'm back to that. And then on the far right, I've got the simulator. Everybody has different ways of laying out their workspace. But yeah, that's interesting.
I think I also stopped using spaces because I switched away from the Magic Mouse to a regular like scroll wheel mouse. So I can't use any of the swipe gestures anymore, which kind of limits what I can do with certain features.
I use a trackpad, like a separate trackpad. Is it the Magic trackpad?
I should do that. I should do what Ken used to do and have a trackpad on one side and a mouse on the other side.
Your brother Ken, yes. He uses the trackpad on the left and a mouse on the right, and that allows him to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Big brain time.
I did have like a vertical anchor mouse and for a while, and then I would find myself reaching up and using the trackpad on my laptop. So I would like switch between them that way, like reaching up onto the stand where my laptop is. Anyway, yeah. Developer micro, what are they? Micro ergonomics. Yeah. Little things. Yeah. But yeah, so you have it kind of wired up with fake data and stuff. Now you really need to integrate it into your actual app so that it shows up. How do you do that?
So once I'm pretty satisfied with how it looks in Storybook, I'll turn off Storybook mode and I'll go into wherever this component is actually going to be rendered in my app layout. It's usually on a screen, or maybe it's inside of a parent component. I'll go to wherever it's being rendered and I'll add it there, and I'll gather the actual data that's going to go into it, which is usually managed by either if it's going straight into a screen, like the screen's managing it from Mobix Daytree, like calling an API to get it. I'm at this point assuming that that's already happening, that I've already set that up. But yeah, I'll render it and pass in the real data, and then I'll load the screen up and mess with layouts however they need to change in order to get it to look right. It may mean adding some kind of wrapper around it or some padding to the parent component or whatever.
Do you find yourself going back to Storybook and being like, I didn't actually get that right?
Sometimes. Usually, there's some things that you shouldn't do within a component itself that a parent should be responsible for managing. If you ever find yourself putting a line self on your component or putting margins on the like root wrapper of your component, that's when you should like take a step back, because anything that's like your component should manage what's inside of it. But anything about your component, about where it is in space or like where it's rendering in the context of its parent should be determined by the parent.
Gotcha.
So occasionally
Stay in
I'll
your
go
lane.
back, stay in your lane, because you want to make sure that like your component manages its own business. And if you're using it multiple places, that it's not doing something unexpected. Like you want to be able to control where it lives in space from the outside and not from the inside.
That makes sense to me. So then it probably starts getting kind of exciting at that point because you actually are seeing it in context. It's like the screen that had a blank spot before now has something functioning there. It's a button, or it's a list view, or it's a image, or, you know, really anything, any sort of component. It's now coming to life. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's one of the really satisfying parts of UI development, and one of the reasons I've really enjoyed being in React Native after having been a sort of platform server backend developer for a long time. I find it really satisfying to see something you just wrote come to life visually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then this is probably the point where if I haven't been testing on both devices or both platforms, which you probably should be testing on both platforms, but if I haven't been, I'll pull up usually Android, because iOS is my default generally.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think that's true for a lot of people. I'm not sure why.
The emulator can be kind of a resource hog, and that I think slows a lot of people down. I think if the emulator worked better than the iOS simulator, it would be reversed, but that's just not the case.
The iOS simulator is very easy to use and it's very smooth. So I'll pop open Android, make sure things still work. It's pretty, it's for things like this, which are pretty straightforward UI elements, it's pretty rare for Android to do something different.
Lately, you've been having to do this on web too. So you actually have to pull it open in web as well.
That's true. For this particular project, there would be a web
third platform.
Yeah, a third platform to check.
And then you could add many different TV platforms. You could add desktop. You could add Windows. You could add Mac OS, Linux, I guess. You could add all kinds of other platforms if you really wanted to, and then you'd be testing it in all of those.
So depending on how many platforms you're developing for, make sure to account for all of the time that you're going to spend testing on different platforms when you estimate how long a feature is going to take.
Yes.
It could be at least half of your time spent.
Yes. And you not only that, but within a particular platform, you might have different screen sizes.
Yes, exactly. So in addition to pulling open Android, I'll maybe pull open an iPhone SE or that's the smallest. I actually think it's discontinued now. What is it now? It's the iPhone 12.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think the SE is discontinued now, but the simulators are still there. But really small screens, or I'll pull open what is like an 11 plus Max or something. Yeah. the really
extra.
Big one. Yeah. The really huge ones.
They just keep adding modifiers to it.
And make sure that I've used Flexbox in the appropriate ways so that things expand and shrink appropriately. Usually when I bring out the small screens is when I realize I haven't put text wrapping on or I haven't constrained widths properly. And so I'll go in and fix those, make sure that things wrap and shrink and truncate the way they should.
This will also come into play when you're testing with large font sizes for accessibility, things like that. You really need to be thinking about all of these things when you're building, and that can be a fair amount of work. But it's all worthwhile to go through all of this and make sure that it's working in all these. I think this is actually where a lot of maybe more new to the industry developers run into problems is they finally get it working on the device that they're testing, and they're so relieved that they finally got it going that they just push it up and are like, okay, hey, it's done, and then someone tests it on a slightly different size of screen, or they check it on Android and it breaks and they have to send it back and say, hey, this isn't done. And so knowing that, hey, okay, I got this working there, but now I need to go check all these other dusty corners and different states and whatnot. That's actually, I think, the mark of a senior engineer is one that won't rest until they know that it works in all those different places, and then they will feel like, okay, it's ready to go.
Even seniors, I'll say this is usually the point where if there's some kind of really stressful deadline, or you're being rushed by the powers that be, or like people are getting impatient, this is generally when even seniors will fall into, okay, well, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Call it done, and not go through the due diligence of testing all the edge cases.
You can, as a developer, you can make a decision, this is good enough, we're going to move on, if it's done intentionally with good communication. So you can say, I did not test this on Android. I did not test this on small screens. I did not do these things because you all told me I need to have this done today.
You can have that conversation with your stakeholders. Yes. And if they're aware of the trade-offs, you can say, okay, it's good enough.
Here's what you're getting for the time that you're willing to invest. And I'm more than willing to go back and do those things later if and when they fall over. But, I mean, there have been situations where we're building apps for literally one device, one type of device. It's a situation maybe where the app will be used in a trade show, and every booth that is going to be using it is going to be using an Apple iPad Air, of a certain vintage. And we know what it's going to go for. There's no point in testing it on an Android device or anything like that. And that can be fine. That's a good trade-off to make as long as it's done intentionally. It's when it's like, hey, everything is working, but then you didn't really think of the other things, or you just ignore those things. That can get everybody into trouble. It's about communication. I mean, honestly, as people are listening to this, they're probably hearing a lot of communication happening as well. It's not just about writing code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
So you're at a point where it's working well on all these different devices, different screen sizes, things like that. Is it time to ship now? Like, what do you do now?
Usually, I'll be pretty satisfied at this point if it's working on a lot of devices. So I'll go ahead and, while I have all my devices open, I'll go ahead and take screenshots of various different states. I'll maybe reopen Storybook and take screenshots of my various use cases in Storybook. Because I think that's a pretty good sort of demo of what the component can do under various constraints. And then I'll commit everything using git add-p, which Jamon doesn't use, making sure that I haven't added...
Git YOLO.
Yeah, which lets me go through and make sure I haven't left any console logs in, or...
By the way, I do use git add-p, by the way. It's and I'll often also when I push up a PR, I'll also always go through the diff and look at it, make sure nothing got in that wasn't supposed to. But yes, I am known for my YOLO tactics.
YOLO. So I'll make sure there's nothing too unexpected in there. Commit it, push it up. I'll open a PR with a pretty detailed description of what I did, maybe any caveats or like gotchas, or hey, take note of this. This is why I made this decision. I'll make sure to include those in the PR description, and then add any screenshots or GIFs. I love making GIFs if it's an interactive feature. This is sort of a one-off component, but if I'm making a feature where I'm adding functionality where the user can like interact with the app, I'll usually take a GIF.
What tool do you use for that?
I use it's a tool called Giphy Capture. So the GIF site Giphy, it's like the service. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they have a capture tool.
Okay.
Which is intended for you to capture stuff and then upload it to Giphy, but I just don't do the upload step. Yeah. But it's basically a sort of transparent overlay, and you can move it anywhere on your screen and just press record, and it'll record what's on your screen and then let you save it as a GIF. And you can change the configuration. If the file is going to be too big, you can decrease the pixel size or the frame rate to get it as small as you need. And it's super easy. No, you don't have to like take a video and convert it. It's just like snap, click, save.
Making it easier on your code reviewers will mean that you'll get better quality reviews.
Yes.
And so that's what you're really looking for there. You're trying to give them a lot of context around what you did and why you did things the way you did. And then hopefully they will give you a good review.
Yep. I always appreciate it when my colleagues give me A, reasonably sized PRs. Jamon.
What was that? What was that tone all about?
Reasonably sized, because if it's so huge that I can't digest it in 15 or 20 minutes, I'm just going to be like, well, I'm just going to approve it because I have no idea what's going on.
I mean, my latest PR, tons of updates, only has 34 files changed and 730 lines of code changed.
Only
added, actually. I did subtract 37 lines of code. This one's particularly bad, and I have no You're
building
excuses.
something new, so of course there's going to be a lot of
new.
lines added. But
yeah, if I was working with other people, in the project, I would definitely be doing things differently. Honestly, at this point, it's probably better for me to just push it to master and then be like, hey, everybody, I'm going to show you what I did.
That's probably true. Yeah. So
reasonably sized PRs, though, that's a very good point. And
reasonably sized, well annotated with visuals.
The thing that gets me, I think, a lot of times is when I'm working on something, I'll notice stuff that needs to be like improved, and it bugs me. And it's like, why don't I just improve it right now? Like improve this little thing over here, or do this little thing over here, refactor this or rename this. It's very hard for me to like put a PR out there that I know is going to have like at least a day turnaround time before I get it back, and then have to work within the other one. Might end up with conflicts. You know what I mean? Like that can be problematic. I know you can fork off of you can branch off of your PR and do that as well. But there's also a lot of project teams have meetings, stand-ups, things like that. When do those kind of come into play?
Totally depends on the team. Our team personally has stand-up right after lunch. It's a pretty neutral time because we have people in different time zones. So you can be pretty sure that most everyone's going to be online around that time. So we'll have a quick stand-up. It's usually 10 minutes. That's
pretty good. A lot of times stand-ups can stretch on and on and on if you're not careful. That's something that project teams have to really pay attention to. So that's with your project team. Now, what about, Infinite Red, for example? We're at Infinite Red here. So do we have other meetings? I know this because I'm usually the one calling them. So when you fit those in as well? Yeah, so being a consultancy, I consider myself part of my client's team, but I'm also part of my Infinite Red team. And so I'll have meetings that are completely unrelated to my client's project that I'll make time for. So we have bi-weekly Infinite Red team, like all team meetings. Sometimes we'll have specific engineering team meetings. Yeah, we just had one yesterday that was about VS Code tips and tricks. And this is one thing that as a consultancy, and I think even in other development environments, it can be similar, where people get siloed, and it's like people don't, especially in remote work, you don't get a chance to like see. I'm not like standing next to you. I'm like, whoa, what did you just do there? That's pretty cool. Or what's that app that you're using? That's cool. Like I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing the results of your work, which is actually really cool for some reasons. It's like it's very like results oriented rather than just how you work oriented. But we also miss out on the good parts of that. So a couple weeks ago, one of my engineers asked me to help them kind of get up to speed better on VS Code. They were still struggling with optimizing their workflow. And so we did a one-on-one where I kind of taught them some different keyboard shortcuts with VS Code and whatnot. And then after, I was like, why don't I just do this with the whole engineering team? I feel like there's a lot of people that could benefit from this. It was an optional thing. Like you didn't have to come, but I scheduled that, and we did that yesterday where we all got together and then shared like, hey, this is how I use multi-cursor support. This is a keyboard shortcut that I use all the time. This is, whatever. And it was like a 45-minute meeting, and it was just packed with all kinds of cool stuff. And we got some, I learned some things for sure. And I've been using VS Code for a very long time. Yeah, I definitely learned some things too. Usually that kind of workflow optimization, I learned from other people. And I learned from, if I spend a lot of time pairing with someone, I'll be like, oh, wow, you just did that really fast. What did you use for that? Yeah.
And so if we don't make the time for that kind of sharing,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. So
Exactly. Those meetings are done. You're kind of getting toward the end of your day. How do you wrap things up?
usually I'll sort of check the Slack channels again, see if anything has really happened during the day while I was more heads down. Maybe I have to prep for the podcast that day, or do some other sort of me specific work.
Yeah.
And then usually I'll sign off and go get my daughter from daycare. And
Yeah. What about breaks during this? Like, you're not just working straight through. You're taking small breaks.
I do
whatever.
eat
Yeah.
occasionally.
You do eat. You're not a robot.
I mean, one of the lovely things about working from home or working remote is that if I reach sort of a natural pause in what I'm doing, I can go down and get a snack or a cup of coffee or switch the laundry or whatever I need to do. So I really love that I can sort of integrate breaks throughout my day and integrate like little pieces of my home life throughout my day without it needing to be a big, like, okay, I'm going to take an hour off to like go home and do something or go to I can, just sort of weave those in throughout the day.
My daughters don't do this really very often anymore, but I think you remember when you first started working at Infinite Red, we'd be on a Zoom call just like we are here. And my daughters would come in and want me to help them with a toy, maybe put some clothes on a Barbie or something like that as we're working. That was just a constant thing with me. And I thought, it was very cool. Now they're much too big for that. And they don't, they don't do that anymore. But yeah, I love the little interruptions, the little kind of, hey Dad, come check this out. And I'll go, look at it or whatever. I actually find those things very cool. Obviously the context shifting can be a little jarring and hard to stay, focused on what you're doing. So you have to have some separation. I have a lock on my door I can use, for example, if I'm in a podcast or something like that. And they've been, they're pretty well trained about like, okay, yeah, don't just bust in those situations. But, we've been working from home for 6+ years or something like that. And it's been fantastic.
I can't imagine going back to an office at this point.
Oh man.
And even now with ever since COVID, my husband's been working from home a lot more. And I've actually really gotten used to being able to hey, I can go downstairs and eat lunch with him.
Yeah, it's been great. And I love this sort of flexibility. And, we try to set it up at Infinite Red. We try to set it up where the expectations are totally normal, where Todd, our my business partner and our CEO, he will say, hey, I'm taking a siesta, this afternoon, and he'll be gone for 2 hours and just taking a nap. And anybody can do that. It's fine. As long as you're not missing a meeting or something, go ahead, take a nap. There's nothing wrong with that. If you, work a little different rhythm, there are some people that work more kind of better at night, but better in the early mornings. They can kind of choose their own path in that. So from that standpoint, the flexibility is really nice. And just even things like, hey, let's all hang out in kitchen table, which is our Zoom room that we use specifically for hanging out. There's different ways to kind of take breaks and step away from it for a little while.
Yep.
I think we've pretty well handled that topic, a day in the life of a React Native developer. If you have any thoughts about this, please do tweet at us. We do read all the tweets, so you can hit up. You can find me at Jamon Holmgren. You can find Robin at Robin_Heinz with an E, and you can also tweet at React Native RDIO, which is our main Twitter account for this show. Robin, do you have any weird bugs that you want to talk about in this episode?
I don't have any this week.
As always, thanks to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, our transcript and release coordinator, Jed Bartosky, and our social media coordinator, Missy Warren. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out, infinite.red/React Native. Special thanks to all of you listening today. Tell people about this podcast, especially if they're new, they're considering React Native, have them check out this podcast. We would really appreciate it. Reminder, we are hiring senior level React Native engineers. Actually, you don't need to necessarily be a React Native engineer, but senior level engineer that has some interest in React Native, US or Canada, and just go to careers.infinite.red and fill it out. I will read your application, I promise, and I will reach out and let you know whether we're interested in moving forward or not. Either way, see you next time.
Bye.